Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Mm.
Today we're diving into a stack of archaeological reports that, well, they don't just add a footnote to history. They really force a rewrite, I think, especially about one of humanity's most persistent and, let's be honest, kind of unfair stereotypes.
You mean the Neanderthal?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The image of the Neanderthal as, the simple grunting ape man.
Yeah, that stereotype of the classic brute, right?
Yeah.
Slouching, big head thrust forward. It's held on for, over a century in the popular imagination.
It really has.
And even as actual archaeological evidence piled up, the general idea seemed to be that, real complexity, things like art or big building projects, advanced social thinking, that stuff started suddenly, and only with us, Homo sapiens.
Right. The U.S. versus them narrative.
Yeah.
But we're going to unpack that outdated image today using some cold, hard facts from deep underground.
Okay.
Our mission for this deep dive is an in-depth exploration of the research around Bruniquel Cave.
That's Saxadia, France.
Ah, yes, Bruniquel. And this site, it holds evidence of these complex stone constructions that aren't just old. They're like colossal engineered monuments.
They really are.
And they demand we rethink the cognitive abilities, the social abilities of our ancient relatives.
Absolutely. The sources we're looking at here, primarily the detailed archaeological reports, the ones published in top journals like Nature, they lay out the construction, the dating, the analysis of these underground features.
Evidence sounds pretty solid.
It's irrefutable, really, and it forces this huge shift in understanding precisely because of who built it. The only humans in Europe at that time, early Neanderthals.
Okay, let's hit the listener with a number then, the fact that just grounds this whole discussion, the initial shockwaves, if you will.
Go for it.
These structures inside Bruniquel Cave, they've been dated precisely to approximately 176,500 years ago.
Wow.
And get this, the precision is plus or minus only 2,100 years.
Just pause and let that sink in for a moment. 176,500 years ago. The depth of time here is absolutely key to understanding how massive this discovery is for you, listening right now.
It's hard to even grasp that time scale.
It really is. I mean, put it in perspective, this construction happened roughly 100,000 years before our species, Homo sapiens, even arrived in Western Europe. 100,000 years.
That's staggering.
Think about famous prehistoric stuff, like the cave paintings at Lascaux, right? Beautiful, iconic.
Yeah, around 20,000 years old.
Exactly. This Neanderthal architecture is 8 times older than Lascaux. 8 times.
So we're looking at this incredible feat of organization, buried way, way back in prehistory, something that required complex planning. The kind of planning that, honestly, previous models just completely denied Neanderthals were capable of.
Utterly denied. This changes the game. All right, let's paint the picture of the discovery itself. Section 1. The discovery, location, and the all-important chronology. Where exactly are we? Okay, so we're in Occitania, southwestern France. It's an area that's already world famous for its Paleolithic sites, loads of caves and shelters.
Right, a rich area for this kind of thing.
Definitely, but Bruniquel Cave is unique, not just because of what was built, but where.
Okay, tell us about the where.
Well, the location itself is the first clue about their planning ability, the cave system. It was naturally sealed off for most of the Pleistocene. Ice Age, basically.
So it was hidden, undisturbed.
Completely undisturbed until modern cavers, back in 1990, actually managed to dig through the collapsed entrance.
Okay, so they get in, and this isn't just some structure near the entrance, like sheltering from the rain.
Not even close, and this is where it gets really mind-blowing. The structures are located an incredible 336 meters from the entrance.
Wait, 336 meters.
Meters, that's over 1,000 feet, deep inside the cave.
Wow. Can you give us a sense of scale for that?
Sure. Think about 3 NFL football fields laid end to end.
Okay.
Or maybe picture the Eiffel Tower tipped over on its side. That's roughly the distance.
3 football fields deep, underground.
And crucially, this entire distance is far, far beyond the reach of any natural daylight. Total darkness. To do anything there, you have to bring your own light.
336 meters. That just fundamentally changes the conversation, doesn't it? This isn't just, occasionally popping into a cave to get out of the cold or find some animals.
No, this is intentional appropriation. It's mastery. It's engineering within a deep, dark, challenging karst environment. That's the geological term for this kind of limestone cave system.
It really is the definition of deep exploration with a purpose.
Exactly. But the story of the research itself had a bit of a hiccup, a long one, actually.
Ah, okay.
So when the structures were first found and documented back in the early 1990s, the initial team found a really important clue, a burnt piece of bone, right there amongst the stone structures.
A burnt bone. That sounds promising for dating.
It did. And that clue led to an initial dating attempt, but it kind of stalled everything for, well, 2 decades.
20 years. Why?
They tried carbon-14 dating on that bone fragment, which was the standard method then, right?
Sure.
But the fragment was just too old. They hit the absolute limit of the C14 method, so the result they got was just a minimum age, recorded as 47,600 years.
Greater than 47,600. So old, but not precisely dated.
Exactly. The carbon-14 just wasn't reliably detectable anymore. It confirmed the structure was ancient, definitely Paleolithic, but it couldn't give that precise date needed to really nail down who built it, especially linking it definitively to the Neanderthals before modern humans arrived.
And then the research stopped.
Tragically, yes.
Mm.
The lead archaeologist at the time, Francois Rousseau, he passed away shortly after that initial work, and without him and without a precise date, the research just stopped. The true significance of these amazing structures was left hanging in limbo.
Wow. So for 20 years, this incredible discovery was just sitting there, an ambiguity in the scientific record.
Pretty much. Until 2013, that's when Jacques Joubert and his team picked it up again. They realized that getting a precise, absolutely undeniable date was the key. That was essential to prove authorship.
And this is where modern dating technology comes in.
This is where modern science really saved the day. Since the materials were way too old for radiocarbon, Joubert's team used uranium-series dating.
Uranium-series, okay, that sounds different.
It is. It's perfect for dating things made of calcium carbonate, like cave formations, speleothems, that's the technical term, stalagmites, stalactites, flowstones, the very stuff these structures are built from.
Okay, walk us through that. For those of us, not hanging out in geology labs, how does uranium-series dating work, especially on broken stalagmites? Sounds quite forensic.
It's actually a really elegant piece of geochemical detective work. So speleothems, stalagmites, flowstones, they form layer by layer as calcium carbonate or calcite precipitates out of dripping water in the cave.
Right, like candle wax dripping.
Kind of, yeah. And when that calcite forms, it naturally incorporates tiny amounts of uranium dissolved in the water, specifically the isotope uranium-234. But, and this is crucial, it incorporates virtually zero thorium, specifically thorium-230.
Okay, so uranium gets in, thorium doesn't. Why is that zero thorium at the start so important?
Because thorium-230 is the direct daughter product of uranium-234 decay. As soon as that calcite hardens and traps the uranium, a clock starts ticking. The uranium atoms slowly, predictably decay into thorium-230 atoms.
Ah, I see.
So by measuring the ratio, how much thorium-230 has built up compared to the amount of uranium-234 that's still left, researchers can calculate exactly how long ago that bit of calcite crystallized. It's a fantastic chronometer for this really deep time range, hundreds of thousands of years.
Okay, that makes sense for dating a whole stalagmite.
Yeah.
But how did they apply it to a structure made of broken pieces broken off other formations?
That's where the cleverness comes in. They use the context of the construction itself to sort of bracket the age, like opening and closing a chronological window. Think about the stalagmites they used as building blocks. The researchers call them speleofacts. These had to be broken off and collected before the structure was built, obviously.
Right.
So if you date the calcite right at the broken tip of one of those speleofacts, the very last bit that formed before it was snapped off, that gives you the maximum possible age for the construction. The structure can't be older than the bits it's made from.
Okay, that's the no earlier than date. How did they get the no later than date, the minimum age?
Well, caves are dynamic environments. Water keeps dripping. So after the Neanderthals built the structures, new calcite started forming on top of them. Thin layers of flowstone began to seal the structures in place.
Nature reclaiming it.
Exactly. So by dating those calcite regrowths, the flowstone layers that formed directly on top of the construction, they established the minimum age. The structure had to be finished before those new layers started forming over it.
That's really elegant. You're sandwiching the event in time using the cave's natural processes.
Precisely. And they didn't just take 1 or 2 samples. They used multiple samples, state-of-the-art techniques, specifically something called multi-collector, inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry, MCICP-MS, which is incredibly sensitive for measuring these tiny isotopic ratios.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is. But it's super precise. They took numerous core samples from the speleofacts used in the rings and from the flowstone layers sealing them.
And the results?
They established this highly reliable replicated age window. The youngest bits of calcite used in the structure dated to about 177,100 years ago, plus or minus 1,500 years. And the oldest bits of the flowstone sealing the structure dated to about 175,200 years ago, plus or minus 800 years.
So construction had to happen between roughly 177,000 and 175,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Exactly, the very tight window, which gives that final, highly robust confirmed age, 176,500 years ago, give or take 2,100 years. And that date firmly places the Neanderthals as the architects, no question.
Absolutely none. Around 177,000 years ago, there simply were no other human populations known in Europe. This construction belongs entirely to Homo neanderthalensis. And it's that precision, that robust dating, that has made the conclusion so widely accepted, even by, the most critical paleoanthropologists.
Okay, let's quickly touch on the climate context. 176,500 years ago. That puts these builders deep inside the last major ice age, right? During a really severe cold period called Marine Isotope Stage 6 or MIS6.
That's right. A very cold time globally.
It seems tough enough just to survive on the surface during a glacial maximum. How on earth did they manage this elaborate, deep underground construction project in those kinds of conditions?
That's a really crucial point, and it highlights another subtle layer of sophistication here. While MIS6 overall was extremely cold and arid, think big ice sheets, harsh tundra-like environments, the specific data from the calcite formations inside the cave added some important nuance. The fact that calcite was still forming, that water was still dripping and depositing minerals around the time the structure was built, and even inside the ring structure itself, that suggests something important.
That it wasn't completely frozen solid down there.
Exactly. It suggests the actual construction probably took place during a relatively warmer and more humid phase within that larger cold period, a temporary thaw, if you like.
A brief warm-up during the deep freeze. An interstadial.
Precisely. Paleoclimatologists call this specific warmer phase VI 6 to 5 in the climate record for that period. It would have allowed water to flow, calcite to deposit, and perhaps made the deep cave environment slightly less frigid, maybe more accessible.
So it suggests they might have seized an opportunity, a climatic window.
It could well be, but, let's be clear. Even during a slightly warmer phase within an ice age, we're still talking about a deep, dark, challenging environment. The sheer logistical effort involved remains absolutely profound, regardless of whether the air temperature was -5 or +5 degrees Celsius down there.
Fair point. The effort is still monumental. Okay, let's move into section 2. Talk about the what? The architectural proof of Neanderthal sophistication. This wasn't just a random pile of rocks.
No, definitely not. This is Neanderthal architecture. Complex, intentional, the core evidence lies in the sheer scale and the engineering involved.
You mentioned the term speleofacts earlier. These are the building blocks.
Yes, the researchers use that term specifically for the broken stalagmites. It emphasizes that they are artifacts, intentionally modified and moved by humans, not natural formations in their original place.
Okay. And what do they build with these speleofacts?
The main construction consists of 2 large annular, meaning ring-shaped structures. Plus, there are 4 smaller adjacent structures, which are basically carefully arranged piles or accumulations of more speleofacts.
Ring structures. Give us a sense of the size of this underground cathedral, for lack of a better word.
Well, cathedral certainly captures the scale and maybe the mystery. The large ring, which they designated Structure A, forms this substantial ellipse. It measures 6.7 meters by 4.5 meters, so roughly 22 by 15 feet.
That's pretty big, like a decent-sized room.
It is. And then there's a smaller ring, Structure B, inside or nearby, forming another ellipse, about 2.2 by 2.1 meters, so roughly 7 feet across.
And the arrangement wasn't haphazard. You mentioned piles, too.
No, the layout seems quite deliberate. 2 of those smaller accumulation stacks were purposefully placed inside the large ring, and the other 2 were placed just outside it. This suggests a defined layout, a sense of plan space, complex spatial organization.
Okay, I keep coming back to the effort involved. We've got the distance 336 meters. Now let's talk about the sheer amount of material they moved.
This is where the argument for collective planning and, frankly, monumental effort really hits home. The researchers meticulously counted and measured. They estimate that the Neanderthals used approximately 400 separate speleofacts to build all 6 structures.
400 pieces of broken stalagmite.
And when they calculated the total cumulative length of all these fragments, if you laid them end to end, it came out to 112.4 meters of stalagmite.
Wow.
And the total estimated weight of calcite, intentionally selected, broken off, carried 336 meters into the darkness, and then assembled, is roughly 2.2 tons.
2.2 tons.
Metric tons, that's nearly 5,000 pounds.
That's the weight of a car. A modern sedan, moved piece by piece, 336 meters into a cave in the pitch black. What evidence proves this material was intentionally engineered for construction rather than just, randomly gathered broken bits?
The intentionality really shines through when you look at the calibration and the uniformity of the pieces they use.
Calibration, meaning they selected for size.
Exactly. The elements weren't just random chunks. The speleofacts used to build the large ring. Structure A had a mean or average length of 34.4 centimeters. The ones used in the smaller ring, structure B, averaged 29.5 centimeters.
So fairly consistent lengths within each structure.
Very consistent. This kind of standardization strongly suggests intentional selection, maybe even some form of measurement or estimation. They knew what size pieces they needed.
And didn't you say something earlier about them using mostly the middle sections?
Yes, that's another critical detail pointing to engineering knowledge. About half of all the elements used consisted only of the middle sections of the original stalagmites, meaning the pointy tips and the wider root sections had been deliberately knocked off.
Why is that significant?
Well, think about a natural stalagmite. The tip is often thin and fragile. The base can be uneven. The middle section is usually the most consistently thick and structurally sound part.
So they were choosing the strongest, most stable parts.
Precisely. By selecting primarily these robust middle sections and maybe even trimming off the weaker ends before transporting them all that way, the Neanderthals demonstrated a practical understanding of structural stability and material customization. They were picking the best bits for stacking and aligning.
That level of standardized preparation?
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems totally inconsistent with just accidental collection or, say, bears knocking things over.
Absolutely. Bears hibernate in caves, sure, but they don't build calibrated, multi-ton elliptical structures. And the construction techniques themselves, it sounds like they understood basic engineering principles like load bearing.
How so?
They didn't just dump the pieces in a circle. The annular structures, the rings, were carefully built with 1 to 4 layers of aligned stalagmites stacked on top of each other.
Okay, stacked layers.
And to keep these rows stable, to stop them from rolling or collapsing inwards, they used shorter elements, smaller pieces, strategically placed inside the layers, like little wedging elements or spacers, to enhance stability.
Like putting chocks under a wheel.
Exactly that kind of principle.
Yeah.
Furthermore, they found some larger, longer stalagmites placed vertically, leaning up against the rings.
Propped up against the main structure.
Yeah, almost like supporting stays or buttresses. It strongly suggests intentional reinforcement, maybe to counteract lateral pressure or just strengthen the whole thing.
Wow. Wedges, buttresses. This structural complexity demonstrates real practical knowledge of how to build something stable. It definitely rules out natural deposition or animal activity.
Completely rules it out. This was built by thinking beings. Okay, let's circle back to the absolute necessity for doing this work. Mastering that deep cave environment. 336 meters deep. You said it required artificial lighting. Continuous.
Yes, and the sustained need for artificial light is perhaps the biggest cognitive leap demonstrated here. This isn't just, striking flint to make a spark. This is about maintaining a viable light source.
Like torches or small fires.
Probably torches, maybe fueled with animal fat, or perhaps small managed hearths they could carry or relocate. Whatever it was, they needed it for the entire duration of this huge multi-stage construction project.
Which involved
finding the right stalagmites, breaking them off, maybe trimming or calibrating them, hauling 2.2 tons of them over 300 meters, and then carefully placing them in layers with wedges, all in total darkness. That's a massive logistical challenge. It absolutely demands planning, foresight, capabilities that were previously only attributed to modern humans, and much, much later.
way later. This pushes that timeline way back.
And they found direct evidence of fire used deep inside, right? Not just near the entrance, but actually on the structures.
Yes, absolutely definitive proof of systematic fire use right there. They found traces of fire on all 6 structures. Detailed analysis showed 57 speleofacts were reddened from heat exposure, and 66 were blackened with soot or char marks.
Okay, visual evidence. But could that just be from torches being held near the structures?
Yeah.
How did they prove fires were intentionally built on them?
They went beyond just looking. They used magnetic surveys. This is one of the most elegant proofs, I think.
Magnetic surveys, how does that work with fire?
Okay, so the cave floor material and the stalagmites themselves contain tiny amounts of iron oxides and some clay minerals, naturally occurring. When you heat these materials above a certain critical temperature, usually around 200 to 250 degrees Celsius, the heat actually alters the mineral structure slightly.
It changes the rock itself.
It does on a microscopic level, and this thermal alteration dramatically increases the rock's magnetic susceptibility. Essentially, the heating process creates tiny, permanent magnetic signatures in the rock where the fire was. These tiny magnets get aligned with the Earth's magnetic field at the time the heating occurred, and then they lock in place as it cools.
So the fire itself leaves a permanent, invisible magnetic fingerprint in the stone structure.
Precisely. The magnetic surveys detected clear magnetic anomalies, they call them dipoles, directly corresponding to these heat-altered zones. It confirmed that numerous intentionally heated areas, basically hearths or fireplaces, were located right on the annular structures themselves.
So they weren't just carrying torches, they were building and maintaining fires right there on the ring.
Yes. The Neanderthals effectively created these permanent detectable signposts proving exactly where they consistently maintained fire, 336 meters deep.
Incredible. And didn't they also find some actual burnt organic stuff?
They did. They located a zone with a concentration of charcoal. And critically, they found that 6.7 centimeter burnt bone fragment we mentioned earlier. Analysis showed it was the diaphysis, the shaft of a bone, from either a bear or maybe some other large herbivore.
And they tell how hot it got.
Yes, molecular analysis confirmed the bone was carbonized, basically turned to charcoal, at a temperature estimated between 300 and 400 degrees Celsius, consistent with being in a campfire.
Wow.
And crucially, this burnt bone fragment was found underneath one of those calcite flowstone layers that sealed the structure. And that sealing layer itself was dated, using uranium-series, to be over 180,000 years old, which further supports the deep antiquity of the whole Neanderthal operation down there, including the fires.
Okay, let's pull all this evidence together. We have customized materials, sophisticated construction techniques, systematic use of light and fire, all 336 meters deep underground, 176,500 years ago. What's the primary conclusion the researchers draw about the kind of society needed to pull this off? The main conclusion, drawn by Joubert, by Chris Stringer, by pretty much everyone who studied it, is unambiguous. Social complexity, meaning this wasn't a one-person job, or even just a small family unit.
Absolutely not.
Right.
Breaking, selecting, trimming, transporting 2.2 tons of calcite,
Right.
and then assembling it into these complex layered structures 336 meters deep. It implies a pre-planned collective project.
Okay.
It required, as the researchers put it, a necessary simultaneous realization of different tasks. You needed some people breaking off the stalagmites. You needed others selecting and maybe trimming them. You needed teams to transport the material. And you probably needed someone directing the actual assembly, making sure the rings were built correctly.
That sounds like,
Yeah.
well, like a construction crew. It suggests a level of organization, communication, maybe even leadership that goes far beyond the old stereotype of the isolated, simple hunter-gatherer Neanderthal just focused on the next meal. It really does. It requires effective communication to coordinate all those tasks. It requires cooperation. It's not just about basic survival instincts anymore. Chris Stringer stated it very clearly. This discovery provides clear evidence that Neanderthals had fully human capabilities in the planning and the construction of stone structures. Fully human capabilities.
And he concludes it suggests a level of social organization more complex than previously thought for this hominid species. They clearly had the capacity for complex, cooperative labor on a truly monumental scale.
Okay, but here's where I have to play devil's advocate, just based on basic survival logic. If they possess this incredible organizational capacity, why on earth expend 2.2 tons of effort building something 346 meters deep in a cave?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
I mean, if the purpose was purely practical, say, a temporary refuge during that cold MIS-6 period, wouldn't a big rock overhang near the surface, or even a simpler shelter much closer to the cave entrance, have worked just fine? It would have saved weeks, maybe months, of dangerous transport and artificial light effort.
That's a very logical point.
Doesn't the sheer, almost gratuitous scale of the effort, especially location, strongly suggest it wasn't purely utilitarian? Doesn't it point toward something more symbolic?
That is precisely the mystery that makes Bruniquel so incredibly compelling, the function. If you assume pure, simple utilitarianism shelter, storage, the location, and the complexity almost defy that logic. Why fight the darkness and the distance?
Oh, what are the possible answers?
Well, they range from the perhaps mundane, maybe some kind of unknown domestic use we haven't figured out. Specialized food storage. Perhaps it was a protected winter spot, maybe used only when the main entrance was blocked by snow or ice.
Okay, those are possibilities. But then you have the other end of the spectrum, the more sublime interpretation, the Neanderthal cathedral idea, a deep sanctuary, a ritual space.
Exactly, a space deliberately set apart deep underground, perhaps for social gatherings, for rituals, for symbolic behaviors that, for whatever reason, demanded removal from the everyday surface world.
And the fact it was sealed off and perfectly preserved for 176,000 years.
It suggests that whatever the original reason was, whether deeply symbolic or strangely utilitarian, it was important enough to them to warrant this massive undertaking. Future research is ongoing, people are looking for more clues, but right now, the function remains one of the greatest unanswered questions in deep prehistory. Okay, let's use Bruniquel as a springboard then. Section 3. Recontextualizing Neanderthal modernity and art. These structures prove Neanderthals had the cognitive chops for large-scale cooperation and mastering their environment way back 176,000 years ago. How does this discovery force us to look at other, maybe smaller, maybe more subtle finds that also challenge that old view? The view that sophisticated behavior only popped up with Homo sapiens. It's the ultimate anchor point for that whole discussion, isn't it? The paradigm shift is definitely real, Bruniquel basically says. Neanderthals were not just sitting around waiting for us modern humans to arrive and bring culture.
Right. It confirms their complex spatial organization, their sophisticated use of fire deep underground, their ability to appropriate and modify environments that we previously thought were too difficult for them. So the next logical question is, did this capacity for complex action also extend to complex symbolic thought, which archaeologists often measure through the presence of non-utilitarian things, basically art and ornaments?
Okay, let's review the record for that symbolic capacity. What evidence do we have for Neanderthal visual art or symbolic behavior? The sources seem to break it down into about 4 main categories. Let's start with the most basic one, pigment use, using colors.
Right. The use of pigments, especially red ochre, that's iron oxide. Basically, rust is incredibly ancient in the human lineage. It goes way, way back. Some researchers even think it might be a practice inherited from a common ancestor we share with Neanderthals.
So it was likely established long before modern humans showed up in Europe.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
We have solid evidence for Neanderthals intentionally processing and using pigments long before Homo sapiens arrived on the scene. Where's the earliest really robust evidence for Neanderthal pigment use?
Some of the earliest reliable examples date back as far as 250,000 to 200,000 years before present. Sites like Maastricht Belvedere in the Netherlands, for instance. They found fragments of red ochre there that had clearly been processed, ground down, scraped.
And that processing is key. It shows it wasn't just a naturally colored rock they picked up.
Exactly. Grinding it implies they were preparing it for use, probably as a powder or a paste, maybe for coloring hides, tools, or potentially even their own bodies.
And later on, the evidence gets even more sophisticated, suggesting actual application like body paint or decorating objects.
Precisely. You look at a site like Cueva de los Aviones in Spain. This dates to about 115,000 years ago. Archaeologists there found marine shells, like cockle shells, that were perforated maybe for stringing.
Okay.
And crucially, these shells contained residues of pigment mixes. They found traces of red lepidocrasite mixed with black charcoal and maybe some other minerals. These shells were clearly being used as containers, like little makeup pots.
Makeup pots, 115,000 years ago.
It strongly suggests they were preparing cosmetic substances, likely used for body painting, maybe painting objects or clothing. And we also find things like black manganese dioxide crayons at sites like Pestalaz in France, again, in clear Neanderthal contexts. These were shaped sticks of pigment used like crayons are today. It reinforces this idea of them using color deliberately for non-utilitarian purposes. Okay, that's pigments. Let's move to the second category, personal ornaments. These are objects modified specifically for display, maybe signaling identity or status.
Right.
These artifacts speak much more directly to ideas of self-awareness, identity, social signaling, and we have some compelling examples here too, going way back.
Like what?
One of the most famous early examples comes from Krapina in Croatia. This site dates to around 130,000 years ago, and there they found 8 talons claws from large birds of prey, white-tailed eagles specifically.
Eagle talent.
And these weren't just random bones. They showed clear-cut marks near the base and polish, use wear, consistent with them having been deliberately modified, maybe strung together, possibly worn as a necklace or attached to clothing.
Using eagle talons. That feels inherently symbolic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just a random bone. It suggests they were appropriating the power or the image of this impressive predator.
It absolutely suggests the attribution of symbolic meaning to a specific, rare, visually dramatic natural object. That's really the core of symbolic thought. And there's more. At Bruniquel Cave in Italy, dated later, around 44,000 years ago, researchers found wing bones from various birds, lammergeier, eagles, pigeons.
Okay.
These bones had distinct cut marks specifically related to removing the large flight feathers. This isn't evidence of eating the birds, it's evidence of carefully extracting the feathers.
For decoration.
Most likely, yes. For adornment, maybe in headdresses, attached to clothing, used in some kind of personal display. Again, that's a behavior we universally associate with symbolic expression in humans.
And then we also have evidence from later periods, closer to the time when modern humans were arriving, like the Shuttle-Peronian ornaments.
Yes, the Shuttle-Peronian period, roughly 45,000 to 40,000 years ago, is often associated with Neanderthals, though there's debate because it overlaps with the arrival of Homo sapiens. But sites like the Grotte de Rennes at Arcy-sur-Cure in France yielded quite a collection of ornaments. Things like ivory pendants, pierced animal teeth found in archaeological levels clearly associated with Neanderthal tools and remains.
So even if there was some interaction or influence later on, the evidence suggests Neanderthals themselves were capable of making and using these kinds of non-utilitarian symbolic objects.
The balance of evidence strongly points that way, yes. They weren't just passive recipients of ideas. Okay, third category, engravings and mark-making. Intentional patterns scratched or carved onto durable surfaces. This seems to require a step towards abstract geometric thinking. It does. This moves us squarely into the realm of early abstract art or symbolic marking. And the most famous example here is probably the engraving found deep inside Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar.
Ah yes, the hashtag engraving.
Exactly. It looks remarkably like a modern hashtag or a crosshatch pattern. It's quite large, about 30 centimeters across, and it was intentionally carved into the bedrock of the cave floor.
And it's definitely Neanderthal.
The sediments covering it were dated to around 39,000 years ago and contained distinctively Neanderthal tools. Modern humans weren't thought to be in that specific region quite yet.
And it wasn't just accidental scratching from butchery or something.
No, microscopic analysis shows the marks were made very deliberately. Someone repeatedly traced the same lines, probably using a pointed stone tool, to create a deep, visible, robust pattern. It looks like a permanent marker or signpost. It clearly demonstrates geometric thought and the intention to symbolically alter the cave environment itself.
And that's not the only example of engraving.
No, there are others. Moving back much earlier in time, we have a fascinating object from Einhornhole Cave in Germany. It's a phalanx bone, a toe bone from a giant deer, an extinct species. And this bone, dated to about 51,000 years ago, has a series of precise, parallel incisions carved into it, forming a clear geometric design. It shows they could apply abstract patterns to portable objects as well, not just cave walls.
And even earlier, you mentioned evidence of tracing patterns on soft cave walls.
Yes, at La Roche-Cotard in France. This site has evidence dating back to around 57,000 years ago, maybe even older. They found what are called finger flutings. These are abstract patterns, lines, zigzags, made simply by people dragging their fingers through the soft layer of decomposed calcite, the Mondmilch, that coated parts of the cave wall back then.
So maybe not high art, but still intentional mark making.
Exactly. It shows intentional manipulation of the deep cave environment for non-utilitarian mark making, far removed from basic survival needs.
Okay, finally, the fourth category, painting. Applying pigment to hard surfaces. Cave painting, parietal art. This is often seen as the pinnacle of early art.
Right, and this used to be the area where the line between Neanderthals and modern humans seemed clearest, but recent dating work has dramatically changed that picture.
How so?
Using that same uranium-series dating technique we discussed for Bruniquel, researchers went back to several caves in Spain known for having very old-looking paintings. Caves like La Pasiega, Meltroviso, and Ardalis.
And they dated the paintings themselves.
Well, they dated the thin calcite layers that formed on top of the paint, giving a minimum age for the artwork underneath. And in all three caves, they found paintings, things like schematic red lines, dots, geometric signs, and even hand stencils that dated to older than 64,000 years ago.
Older than 64,000 years. And why is that date so significant?
Because the consensus is that Homo sapiens had not yet arrived in the Iberian Peninsula by 64,000 years ago. The only humans there at that time were Neanderthals.
So the artwork must have been made by Neanderthals.
That's the strong conclusion. Let's focus on one of those caves, Cueva de Ardalis, because the evidence there suggests more than just a one-off painting event.
Okay, what did they find at Ardels?
The Ardales site is really remarkable. Detailed analysis, including pigment analysis and dating of multiple calcite layers covering the paint, confirmed something fascinating. Red ochre pigment wasn't just applied once. It was applied recurrently, over and over again, to specific selected stalagmites and areas of the cave wall.
Over a long period of time.
Yes, over potentially thousands of years, specifically spanning the main Neanderthal occupation period at the site, which runs from about 65,000 years ago up to maybe 45,000 years ago.
So it wasn't just one Neanderthal artist. It suggests a sustained tradition.
It strongly suggests that particular locations within the cave, certain marked stalagmites, held some kind of ongoing symbolic or ritualistic importance for generations of Neanderthals living in that area. They understood rock painting, they practiced it, and they did so repeatedly over a very long time.
Okay, this is fascinating because when you line up the best examples we've just discussed, the sheer scale and complexity of Bruniquel, the painted stalagmites at Ardales going back over 64,000 years, the Carpina eagle talons at 130,000 years. In terms of technical quality, or the cognitive complexity required, these seem comparable to the earliest known symbolic manifestations from Homo sapiens in Africa or the Near East.
That's a really crucial point. Cognitively, they absolutely seem to have had the capacity. They could think symbolically, they could plan complex actions, they could create non-utilitarian objects.
So if they had the capacity, why isn't the Neanderthal archaeological record overflowing with art and ornaments? Why do these examples, while impressive, still seem relatively few and far between compared to what we see later with modern humans?
And that brings us to the cornerstone of the modern debate, the real nuance here. It's the difference between quality or capacity and quantity or frequency and persistence.
Okay, explain that distinction.
Neanderthals clearly demonstrated the ability to create complex, symbolic things. Bruniquel proves the ability for complex construction. Ardales proves the ability for painting. Carpina proves the ability for ornaments. The capacity was there. But the critical difference seems to lie not in the fundamental ability, but in the quantity and the persistence of these behaviors as widespread cultural practices.
Meaning they could do it, but maybe they didn't do it very often or it didn't catch on widely.
Exactly. The Neanderthal record, when you look at it overall, is still characterized by relatively few examples, often isolated finds. You might get one incised bone here, a handful of eagle talons there, a few painted caves in Spain. It suggests that these symbolic acts might have been perhaps more sporadic, maybe individual instances of innovation or creativity by certain groups or individuals.
Innovations that maybe didn't get passed on reliably or didn't become deeply embedded in their culture across the board.
Possibly. Perhaps they were reinvented ad hoc sometimes, or maybe they just failed to solidify into what we'd call a robust, high-frequency, widely transmitted cultural tradition that affected everyone.
And how does that contrast with the early modern human record?
It contrasts quite dramatically, actually. When you look at early Homo sapiens sites, even going back quite far, you often see evidence of what some researchers call cultural crystallization.
Cultural crystallization.
Meaning you find not just one or two symbolic items, but abundant, concentrated clusters of them. Lots of the same kinds of things, made in similar ways, suggesting a socially learned, robust, and reliable cultural tradition was already in place.
Okay, give us an example.
Think about shell beads. We mentioned Cueva de los Aviones with its pigment-stained shells from 115,000 years ago, maybe a handful. Now compare that to early Homo sapiens sites. In South Africa, Blombos Cave yielded a total of 68 nacerious shells, all intentionally perforated in the same way, many showing wear patterns suggesting they were strung and worn as beads. And these date to around 75,000 years ago.
68 beads in one place.
And even earlier. At Bruniquel Cave in Morocco, researchers recently found 32 shell beads from two different species, again deliberately perforated. And these date to a stunning 142,000 years ago.
Wow, 142,000 years ago. That's significantly older than Blombos.
It is. So the difference isn't just about the ability to punch a hole in one shell. It's about the volume, the concentration, making dozens consistently, teaching that practice across generations so it becomes a widespread cultural marker.
So the sheer quantity suggests it was a deeply embedded social practice for early Homo sapiens, whereas for Neanderthals, maybe it was more occasional or localized.
That's the hypothesis suggested by the current disparity in the evidence. While Neanderthals clearly possessed the fundamental cognitive hardware for symbolic behavior, they might have lacked something in the software or the network. Maybe they lacked the necessary social infrastructure, perhaps lower population densities, less reliable social connections between distant groups. Or maybe they just had different cultural priorities.
Meaning, making art and ornaments just wasn't as important to them.
Or perhaps the conditions weren't right for those behaviors to become a high-frequency, diversified, long-lasting tradition in the way they did for our lineage. Their symbolic output, while definitely present and sometimes brilliant, seems perhaps more culturally constrained, less explosive, you might say.
So let's bring it back to Bruniquel. The complexity of that structure proves the capacity for immense planning and cooperation. But the relative scarcity of, say, portable art like beads or carvings might suggest that the application of that cognitive capacity towards abstract symbolic communication, especially personal display, was perhaps less prioritized or less easily transmitted within Neanderthal society.
That's a good way to put the current nuanced view. Their society was clearly organized enough to move 2.2 tons of rock 336 meters deep for some purpose, but maybe their social networking or their cultural values meant that things like displaying personal symbolic wealth through ornaments or creating lots of small-scale representational art just didn't catch on or take hold as defining high-frequency traditions across their entire population and time span.
And we should also note, shouldn't we, the definitive absence of certain types of complex symbolic practices in the Neanderthal record, things that become quite common with modern humans later on.
Yes, that absence is also telling. Especially after about 50,000 years ago, the Homo sapiens archaeological record in Europe and elsewhere becomes increasingly defined by two key practices that seem entirely missing from the known Neanderthal record right up until their disappearance.
What are those?
First is the development of complex, highly stylized crafted ornaments. Things made essentially from scratch using reductive techniques like intricate pendants carved from bone or ivory, not just modified natural objects like shells or teeth.
Okay, ornaments made from raw materials.
Right. And second, and perhaps even more critically, is the distinct absence in the Neanderthal record of sculpted figurines. Small, three-dimensional representations of humans, like the Venus's figurines or animals. These become relatively common in modern human contexts across Eurasia after about 40,000 years ago, but we have zero convincing examples associated with Neanderthals.
So, despite Bruniquel, despite the Spanish cave paintings, there were still certain symbolic avenues they apparently didn't explore, or that didn't preserve.
Exactly. It suggests differences in the trajectory or the focus of symbolic expression between the two lineages. Yet, Bruniquel remains the ultimate challenge to any overly simplistic model, doesn't it?
It really does.
Uh,
It proves they were capable of this massive, complex, collective construction project that, frankly, dwarfs almost any other known deep cave structure from that entire Middle Paleolithic era made by anyone.
It forces us to broaden our definition of fully human capabilities. They were clearly masters of their environment in ways we didn't appreciate. They were planners, they were cooperators, they might have expressed art or symbolism differently, perhaps more sporadically compared to the later explosions seen with Homo sapiens. But the Bruniquel structures confirm, without a doubt, their society was organized enough to execute monumental, potentially non-essential projects deep underground at a time when that kind of behavior was thought to be completely beyond them.
Okay, let's wrap up this deep dive.
Sure.
Our exploration for Bruniquel Cave has done, I think, far more than just identify some ancient pile of rocks. It has fundamentally shattered that old, outdated image of the Neanderthal. We've confirmed that 176,500 years ago, early Neanderthals engineered and built this massive, complex set of structures, 336 meters deep inside a cave, a project that required mastering artificial light, standardizing building materials using structural techniques like wedging and buttressing, and just the sheer logistical coordination to transport 2.2 tons of calcite into the pitch black.
It really stands as an irrefutable testament to their capacity for high-level planning, for complex communication, and for collective societal tasks. The intentional appropriation and modification of that deep karst space to build these elaborate, massive rings, it reveals fully human capabilities in organization and engineering. It proves their lives were structured around far more than just the bare necessities of the daily hunt and basic survival.
The Bruniquel structure, this Neanderthal cathedral, as some have called it, really stands as a profound marker of early humanity. Its existence tells us almost everything about their capacity, but frustratingly, almost nothing definitive about their motives.
And that, I think, is the powerful and provocative thought we want to leave with you, the listener. We know this incredible structure was built. We know it required the sustained, coordinated effort of many individuals over a significant period, but its actual function remains an absolute tantalizing mystery.
Yeah.
Was this 2-ton construction hidden 336 meters deep in the eternal darkness of the cave, just a very elaborate temporary refuge during a cold snap? Or was it something more? A dedicated, perhaps sacred space set aside for ritual, for social gathering, for something symbolic?
What does that enormous coordinated effort tell us about what Neanderthals truly valued, if it wasn't just about staying alive?
Exactly. What does it mean that they invested so much labor, so much planning into this specific place, this specific construction? It strongly suggests they prized something abstract enough, maybe a collective identity, a connection to a special place, a ritual need, a shared memory, prized it enough to warrant monumental architecture deep underground, 100,000 years before modern humans even arrived in Europe to paint the walls of Lascaux. It's an amazing thought to ponder.